Hello Year 12, welcome back to Hamlet. We're up to the last scene in Act 3, Scene 4. This is also known as the closet scene, and it's one of the most famous scenes written by Shakespeare. It's quite a long scene, so it might take us a few videos to get through the whole thing. So this scene is set in the Queen's closet, which is sort of like a bedroom, or maybe more like a dressing room. So basically this first bit here, up until the entrance of Hamlet, is where Polonius comes in and hides behind the arras or the curtain, and he instructs Gertrude on what to say to Hamlet and how to say it. So if you notice the high modality, so will and I will, and then also the imperative tone, there, and there. So that indicates the high modality and the imperative tone together indicate that Polonius is controlling the situation despite the fact that he's actually socially inferior to Gertrude. So then we have Hamlet enter down here. And the exchange that follows, so really the rest of the scene, allows us to explore that relationship between Hamlet and his mother, as well as Hamlet's ideas about family loyalty. Okay. Hamlet just wants to know why Gertrude has called him here, and Gertrude responds by saying, "You've upset Claudius." But of course, she uses the phrase "thy father" when she's talking about Claudius, and that gets Hamlet a bit offended. And so he mocks her by taking her sentence structure and mimicking it, but changing the meaning by saying "my father," as in King Hamlet rather than Claudius. And then again, the Queen sort of says, "Oh, come on, you're being a bit silly. Let's get on with our conversation." And he repeats and mimics that sentence structure again with her answer in order to be quite rude, and he calls her wicked. So she's quite surprised by this. You can see by her exclamation and her question, she's very surprised that he's being so rude to her, because it's out of character for Hamlet. And you can see, if you contrast the way that he's speaking to her in this scene to the way that he speaks to her the first time we meet her in procession with Claudius, where she asks him not to go to the university, we can see that it's quite a strong contrast. So then Hamlet identifies her, and the way that he identifies her is by focusing on relational nouns. So he calls her the Queen, your husband's brother's wife, and my mother. So he's identifying her by her relationships with other people, and in particular by her relationship to King Hamlet rather than Claudius. He also uses the interjected exclamation there, "would it were not so," which is quite a nasty thing to say, that he wishes that she wasn't his mother. So then the scene begins to get a little bit more angry. So it's already started quite violently, but then here Hamlet says, come and sit you down, you shall not budge." So he's physically manoeuvring her here. He's physically pushing her to sit down. And he says, "You go not till I set you up a glass where you may see the inmost part of you." So when he says glass, he means mirror. So he's saying, sit down and look in the mirror. And it's quite symbolic, because he's talking about looking in the mirror in order to see into her own soul, in order to reflect on her own behaviour. So because he's physically manoeuvring her and also speaking quite nastily to her, she replies by saying, "What are you doing? Are you going to murder me? Help, help." And because, of course, Polonius, being the nosy man that he is hiding behind the curtain, he responds by saying, "Uh-oh, help, help, someone come and help." So Hamlet draws his sword, and he refers to the person behind the curtain, who he thinks is Claudius. He refers to them as a rat. So again, we've got that metaphorical language that's quite symbolic of his attitude towards Claudius. And then we have the alliteration, dead for a ducat, dead. So a ducat is money, so he's making a joke that he can kill the rat for $1 or so. You know, like, I bet I can kill the rat first go if you give me $1. And so that harsh D sound in that alliteration demonstrates the anger that he's feeling at that time. So the significance of that stage direction makes a pass through the arras. He can't see Polonius, so it becomes quite clear in the next page as well that he definitely thinks that that was Claudius that he was killing. He didn't mean to kill Polonius. So it's significant here. Polonius is behind when he falls and dies. So that means that the other characters on the stage can't see him. So the audience might be able to see him, depending on how the director has set it up, but Hamlet and Gertrude can't. So Gertrude is like, oh, what have you done? You've killed someone. And Hamlet's like, I don't know, I hope it was the king. And Gertrude says, well, that was a terrible act. What a terrible thing to do there. And Hamlet replies, it's almost as bad as kill a king and marry with his brother. So he's got that accusing tone, and he's just come out and straight out told Gertrude, his mother, what he thinks she's done. And she responds with astonishment as kill a king, so that repetition and exclamation indicates the surprise and disbelief that she's feeling about that. It's quite interesting. After this, that point never comes back up again. Hamlet never asks her whether she knew that Claudius killed King Hamlet. And she doesn't come back to it. She doesn't ask whether King Hamlet was murdered. So it's quite significant. So then we have Hamlet finally lifting up the curtain and realising that he's killed Polonius, not Claudius. And so we have the description of Polonius as wretched, rash and intruding. And then he openly says, I took thee for thy better, as in social better. So he says, I thought that it was Claudius behind the curtain. So he openly admits that he was trying to kill Claudius. And then he says, take thy fortune thou findst to be too busy is some danger. So if you're poking your nose into other people's business, of course you're going to end up dead. So it's pretty dismissive there. That's all that Hamlet says about killing Polonius at this point. And then he changes his attention, shifts it back to Gertrude, and he says to Gertrude, leave wringing of your hands, so stop wringing your hands together, sit down and let me wring your heart. For so I shall, if it be made of penetrable stuff, if damned custom have not brassed it so that it is proof and bulwark against sense. So he's going to try and use reason to try and emotionally manipulate her into stopping her relationship with Claudius. So don't forget, in terms of let me wring your heart, that's Hamlet's intention. And if you remember, he said specifically that that was going to be his intention at the end of Act 3, Scene 2. So Gertrude is still fairly disbelieving about the way that Hamlet is treating her. So she also ignores Polonius' dead body at their feet, and says, how do you dare to be so rude? How do you dare to speak to me like this? What have I done to deserve this? And Hamlet replies with the very unspecific answer, such an act and such a deed. So it's not particularly helpful to her because she doesn't understand why he's so upset. But he says that the act that she has done is so bad that it takes off the rose from the innocence of her first love and makes a mockery of her original marriage vows. So notice that he refers to it as the rose. So it's that continuation of the garden imagery that we've had the whole way through. When he's talking about Gertrude's marriage to Hamlet, King Hamlet, he uses the alliteration of that soft F sound from the fair forehead of an innocent love. So we've got that soft sound matching Hamlet's positive view of his father's marriage to Gertrude. And then he goes on to start to describe the contrasts between her first marriage and her second marriage, and he says that heaven's face doth glow. So that means that heaven is blushing with shame and embarrassment because Gertrude has made such a terrible mistake in marrying Claudius. So then